Cnidians undertook to obtain his recall. Now the Cnidians were close friends of the Tarentines, which made him think there was no likelier means of procuring his return. Darius promised and performed his part, for he sent a messenger to Cnidus and commanded the Cnidians to restore Gilus. The Cnidians did as he wished, but found themselves unable to persuade the Tarentines, and were too weak to attempt force. Such then was the course which this matter took. These were the first Persians who ever came from Asia to Greece, and they were sent to spy out the land for the reason which I have before mentioned. After this, King Darius besieged and took Samos, which was the first city, Greek or barbarian, that he conquered. The cause of his making war upon Samos was the following. At the time when Kambousi, son of Cyrus, marched against Egypt, vast numbers of Greeks flocked thither, some, as might have been looked for, to push their trade, others to serve in his army, others again merely to see the land. Among these last was Seleucus, son of Iaches, and brother of Polycrates, at that time an exile from Samos. This Seleucus, during his stay in Egypt, met with a singular piece of good fortune. He happened one day to put on a scarlet cloak, and thus attired to go into the marketplace at Memphis, when Darius, who was one of Cambyses' bodyguard, and not at that time a man of any account, saw him, and taking a strong liking to the dress, went up and offered to purchase it. Seleucus perceived how anxious he was, and by a lucky inspiration answered, "There is no price at which I would sell my cloak, but I'll give it thee for nothing, if it must needs be thine." Darius thanked him and accepted the garment. Poor Seleucus felt at the time that he had fooled away his cloak in a very simple manner, but afterwards, when in the course of years Cambyses died, and the 7 Persians rose in revolt against the Magus, and Darius was the man chosen out of the 7 to have the kingdom, Seleucus learnt that the person to whom the crown had come was the very man who had coveted his cloak in Egypt, and to whom he had freely given it. So he made his way to Susa, and seating himself at the portal of the royal palace, gave out that he was a benefactor of the king. Then the doorkeeper went and told Darius. Amazed at what he heard, the king said thus within himself, "What Greek can have been my benefactor, or to which of them do I owe anything so lately as I have got the kingdom? Scarcely a man of them all has been here, not more than 1 or 2 certainly since I came to the throne, nor can I remember that I am in the debt of any Greek. However, bring him in and let me hear what he means by his boast." So the doorkeeper ushered Seleucus into the presence, and the interpreters asked him who he was, and what he'd done that he should call himself a benefactor of the king. Then Seleucus told the whole story of the cloak, and said that it was he who had made Darius the present. Hereupon Darius exclaimed, "O thou most generous of men, art thou indeed he who, when I had no power at all, gavest me something, albeit little? Truly the favour is as great as a very grand present would be nowadays. I'll therefore give thee in return gold and silver without stint, that thou mayst never repent of having rendered a service to Darius, son of Hystaspes." "Give me not, O king," replied Seleucus, "either silver or gold, but recover me Samos, my native land, and let that be thy gift to me. It belongs now to a slave of ours, who, when Herodotus put my brother Polycrates to death, became its master. Give me Samos, I beg, but give it unharmed, with no bloodshed, no leading into captivity." When he heard this, Darius sent off an army under Otanes, one of the 7, with orders to accomplish all that Seleucus had desired. And Otanes went down to the coast and made ready to cross over. The government of Samos was held at this time by Maiandrius, son of Maiandrius, whom Polycrates had appointed as his deputy. This person conceived the wish to act like the justest of men, but it was not allowed him to do so. On receiving tidings of the death of Polycrates, he forthwith raised an altar to Jove, the protector of freedom, and assigned it the piece of ground which may still be seen in the suburb. This done, he assembled all the citizens and spoke to them as follows. Ye know, friends, that the sceptre of Polycrates and all his power has passed into my hands, and if I choose, I may rule over you. But what I condemn in another, I will, if I may, avoid myself. I never approved the ambition of Polycrates to lord it over men as good as himself, nor looked with favour on any of those who have done the like. Now therefore, since he has fulfilled his destiny, I lay down my office and proclaim equal rights. All that I claim in return is 6 talents from the treasures of Polycrates, and the priesthood of Jove, the protector of freedom, for myself and my descendants forever. Allow me this as the man by whom his temple has been built, and by whom ye yourselves are now restored to liberty. As soon as Maiandrius had ended, one of the Samians rose up and said, As if thou wert fit to rule us, base-born and rascal as thou art, think rather of accounting for the moneys which thou hast fingered. The man who thus spoke was a certain Telesarchus, one of the leading citizens. Maiandrius, therefore, feeling sure that if he laid down the sovereign power, someone else would become tyrant in his room, gave up the thought of relinquishing it. Withdrawing to the citadel, he sent for the chief men, one by one, under pretence of showing them his accounts, and as fast as they came, arrested them and put them in irons. So these men were bound, and Maiandrius, within a short time, fell sick. Whereupon Lycoritus, one of his brothers, thinking that he was going to die, and wishing to make his own accession to the throne the easier, slew all the prisoners. It seemed that the Samians didn't choose to be a free people. When the Persians, whose business it was to restore Seleucin, reached Samos, not a man was found to lift up his head against them. Maiandrius and his partisans expressed themselves willing to quit the island upon certain terms, and these terms were agreed to by Otanes. After the treaty was made, the most distinguished of the Persians had their thrones brought, and seated themselves over against the citadel. Now the king Maiandrius had a light-headed brother, Cadeilaus by name, whom for some offence or other he had shut up in prison. This man heard what was going on, and peering through his bars, saw the Persians sitting peacefully upon their seats. Whereupon he exclaimed aloud, and said he must speak with Maiandrius. When this was reported to him, Maiandrius gave orders that Cadeilaus should be released from prison, and brought into his presence. No sooner did he arrive, than he began reviling and abusing his brother, and strove to persuade him to attack the Persians. Thou meanest-spirited of men, he said, thou canst keep me, thy brother, chained in a dungeon, notwithstanding that I've done nothing worthy of bonds. But when the Persians come and drive thee forth a houseless wanderer from thy native land, thou lookest on, and hast not the heart to seek revenge, though they might so easily be subdued. If thou, however, art afraid, lend me thy soldiers, and I will make them pay dearly for thy coming here. I engage the 2 to send thee first safe out of the island. So spake Cadeilaus, and Maiandrius gave consent. Not, I believe, that he was so void of sense as to imagine that his own forces could overcome those of the king, but because he was jealous of Seleucin, and didn't wish him to get so quietly an unharmed city. He desired, therefore, to rouse the anger of the Persians against Samos, that so he might deliver it up to Seleucin with its power at the lowest possible ebb, for he knew well that if the Persians met with a disaster, they would be furious against the Samians, while he himself felt secure of a retreat at any time that he liked, since he had a secret passage underground, leading from the citadel to the sea. Maiandrius accordingly took ship and sailed away from Samos, and Cadeilaus, having armed all the mercenaries, threw open the gates and fell upon the Persians, who looked for nothing less, since they supposed that the whole matter had been arranged by treaty. At the first onslaught, therefore, all the Persians of most note, men who were in the habit of using litters, were slain by the mercenaries. The rest of the army, however, came to the rescue, defeated the mercenaries, and drove them back into the citadel. Then Otanes, the general, when he saw the great calamity which had befallen the Persians, made up his mind to forget the orders which Darius had given him, not to kill or enslave a single Samian, but to deliver up the island unharmed to Seleucen, and gave the word to his army that they should slay the Samians, both men and boys, wherever they could find them. Upon this, some of his troops laid siege to the citadel, while others began the massacre, killing all they met, some outside, some inside the temples. Maiandrius fled from Samos to Lacedaemon, and conveyed thither all the riches which he had brought away from the island, after which he acted as follows. Having placed upon his board all the gold and silver vessels that he had, and bade his servants employ themselves in cleaning them, he himself went and entered into conversation with Cleomenes, son of Anaxandridas, king of Sparta, and as they talked, brought him along to his house. There Cleomenes, seeing the plate, was filled with wonder and astonishment, whereon the other begged that he would carry home with him any of the vessels that he liked. Maiandrius said this 2 or 3 times, but Cleomenes here displayed surpassing honesty. He refused the gift, and thinking that if Maiandrius made the same offers to others, he would get the aid he sought, the Spartan king went straight to the ephors and told them it would be best for Sparta that the Samian stranger should be sent away from the Peloponnese, for otherwise he might perchance persuade himself or some other Spartan to be base. The ephors took his advice and let Maiandrius know by a herald that he must leave the city. Meanwhile the Persians netted Samos and delivered it up to Seleucen, stripped of all its men. After some time, however, this same general Otanes was induced to repeople it by a dream which he had, and a loathsome disease that seized on him. After the armament of Otanes had set sail for Samos, the Babylonians revolted, having made every preparation for defence. During all the time that the Magus was king, and while the 7 were conspiring, they had profited by the troubles, and had made themselves ready against a siege. And it happened somehow or other that no one perceived what they were doing. At last, when the time came for rebelling openly, they did as follows. Having first set apart their mothers, each man chose besides out of his whole household 1 woman, whomsoever he pleased. These alone were allowed to live, while all the rest were brought to one place and strangled. The women chosen were kept to make bread for the men, while the others were strangled that they might not consume the stores. When tidings reached Darius of what had happened, he drew together all his power, and began the war by marching straight upon Babylon and laying siege to the place. The Babylonians, however, cared not a whit for his siege. Mounting upon the battlements that crowned their walls, they insulted and jeered at Darius and his mighty host. One even shouted to them and said, "Why sit ye there, Persians? Why do ye not go back to your homes? Till mules foal, ye will not take our city." This was said by a Babylonian who thought that a mule would never foal. Now when 1 year and 7 months had passed, Darius and his army were quite wearied out, finding that they couldn't anyhow take the city. All stratagems and all arts had been used, and yet the king could not prevail, not even when he tried the means by which Cyrus made himself master of the place. The Babylonians were ever upon the watch, and he found no way of conquering them. At last, in the 20th month, a marvellous thing happened to Zopyrus, son of the Megabyzus, who was among the 7 men that overthrew the Magus. One of his sumpter mules gave birth to a foal. Zopyrus, when they told him, not thinking that it could be true, went and saw the colt with his own eyes, after which he commanded his servants to tell no one what had come to pass, while he himself pondered the matter. Calling to mind then the words of the Babylonian at the beginning of the siege, "Till mules foal, ye shall not take our city," he thought, as he reflected on this speech, that Babylon might now be taken, for it seemed to him that there was a divine providence in the man having used the phrase, and then his mule having foaled. As soon, therefore, as he felt within himself that Babylon was fated to be taken, he went to Darius and asked him if he set a very high value on its conquest. When he found that Darius did indeed value it highly, he considered further with himself how he might make the deed his own, and be the man to take Babylon. Noble exploits in Persia are ever highly honoured, and bring their authors to greatness. He therefore reviewed all ways of bringing the city under, but found none by which he could hope to prevail, unless he maimed himself, and then went over to the enemy. To do this, seeming to him a light matter, he mutilated himself in a way that was utterly without remedy, for he cut off his own nose and ears, and then, clipping his hair close and flogging himself with a scourge, he came in his plight before Darius. Wrath stirred within the king at the sight of a man of his lofty rank in such a condition. Leaping down from his throne, he exclaimed aloud and asked Sopirus who it was that had disfigured him, and what he had done to be so treated. Sopirus answered, "There is not a man in the world but thou, O king, that could reduce me to such a plight. No stranger's hands have wrought this work on me but my own only. I maimed myself because I couldn't endure that the Assyrians should laugh at the Persians." "Wretched man," said Darius, "thou coverest the foulest deed with the fairest possible name when thou sayest thy maiming is to help our siege forward. How will thy disfigurement, thou simpleton, induce the enemy to yield one day the sooner? Surely thou hast gone out of thy mind when thou didst so misuse thyself." "Had I told thee," rejoined the other, "what I was bent on doing, thou wouldst not have suffered it. As it is, I kept my own counsel, and so accomplished my plans. Now, therefore, if there be no failure on thy part, we shall take Babylon. I will desert to the enemy as I am, and when I get into their city I will tell them that it is by thee I have been thus treated. I think they will believe my words, and entrust me with a command of troops. Thou, on thy part, must wait till the 10th day after I'm entered into the town, and then place near to the gates of Semiramis a detachment of thy army, troops for whose loss thou wilt care little, 1,000 men. Wait after that 7 days, and post me another detachment, 2,000 strong, at the Nineveh gates. Then let 20 days pass, and at the end of that time station near the Chaldean gates a body of 4,000. Let neither these nor the former troops be armed with any weapons but their swords. Those thou mayst leave them. After the 20 days are over, bid thy whole army attack the city on every side, and put me 2 bodies of Persians, one at the Pelion, the other at the Kissian gates. For I expect that, on account of my successes, the Babylonians will entrust everything, even the keys of their gates, to me. Then it will be for me and my Persians to do the rest." Having left these instructions, Sopirus fled towards the gates of the town, often looking back, to give himself the air of a deserter. The men upon the towers, whose business it was to keep a lookout, observing him, hastened down, and setting one of the gates slightly ajar, questioned him who he was, and on what errand he had come. He replied that he was Sopirus, and had deserted to them from the Persians. Then the doorkeepers, when they heard this, carried him at once before the magistrates. Introduced into the assembly, he began to bewail his misfortunes, telling them that Darius had maltreated him in the way they could see, only because he had given advice that the siege should be raised, since there seemed no hope of taking the city. And now, he went on to say, my coming to you, Babylonians, will prove the greatest gain that you could possibly receive, while to Darius and the Persians it will be the severest loss. Verily, he by whom I have been so mutilated shall not escape unpunished, and truly all the paths of his counsels are known to me. Thus did Sopirus speak. The Babylonians, seeing a Persian of such exalted rank in so grievous a plight, his nose and ears cut off, his body red with marks of scourging and with blood, had no suspicion but that he spoke the truth, and was really come to be their friend and helper. They were ready, therefore, to grant him anything that he asked, and on his suing for a command, they entrusted to him a body of troops, with the help of which he proceeded to do as he had arranged with Darius. On the 10th day after his flight, he led out his detachment, and surrounding the 1,000 men whom Darius, according to agreement, had sent first, he fell upon them and slew them all. Then the Babylonians, seeing that his deeds were as brave as his words, were beyond measure pleased, and set no bounds to their trust. He waited, however, and when the next period agreed on had elapsed, again with a band of picked men he sallied forth and slaughtered the 2,000. After this second exploit, his praise was in all mouths. Once more, however, he waited till the interval appointed had gone by, and then led the troops to the place where the 4,000 were. He put them also to the sword. This last victory gave the finishing stroke to his power, and made him all in all with the Babylonians. Accordingly, they committed to him the command of their whole army, and put the keys of their city into his hands. Darius now, still keeping to the plan agreed upon, attacked the walls on every side, whereupon Zopyrus played out the remainder of his stratagem. While the Babylonians, crowding to the walls, did their best to resist the Persian assault, he threw open the Kyrenia and the Pelion gates and admitted the enemy. Such of the Babylonians as witnessed the treachery took refuge in the temple of Bel. The rest, who didn't see it, kept at their posts till at last they too learnt that they were betrayed. Thus was Babylon taken for the second time. Darius, having become master of the place, destroyed the wall and tore down all the gates. For Cyrus had done neither the one nor the other when he took Babylon. He then chose out near 3,000 of the leading citizens and caused them to be crucified, while he allowed the remainder still to inhabit the city. Further, wishing to prevent the race of the Babylonians from becoming extinct, he provided wives for them in the room of those whom, as I explained before, they strangled to save their stores. These he levied from the nations bordering on Babylonia, who were each required to send so large a number to Babylon that in all there were collected no fewer than 50,000. It's from these women that the Babylonians of our times are sprung. As for Zopyrus, he was considered by Darius to have surpassed in the greatness of his achievements all other Persians, whether of former or of later times, except only Cyrus, with whom no Persian ever yet thought himself worthy to compare. Darius, as the story goes, would often say that he had rather Zopyrus were unmaimed than be master of 20 more Babylons. And he honoured Zopyrus greatly. Year by year he presented him with all the gifts which are held in most esteem among the Persians. He gave him likewise the government of Babylon for his life, free from tribute, and he also granted him many other favours. Megabyzus, who held the command in Egypt against the Athenians and their allies, was a son of this Zopyrus, and Zopyrus, who fled from Persia to Athens, was a son of this Megabyzus.